Welcome into the Capital PTBO Sports Show. You are watching on your TV, Peterborough, Lindsay, and you are also listening wherever you do your downloading. It is an MNC podcast production piece, and a very special episode today, Mark.
Absolutely. First time for me.
First time for you, and when you think of great professional athletes in Toronto that wore blue and were number 93.
There's one.
I think this is the one. Like there's another one.
There's another one. We won't say which one it is because there's one guy in studio and there's one guy that's not.
And there's one guy you've heard of.
And there's and he's here in the shop. How did you figure that one?
Gabe Robinson, Grey Cup champion, former member of the Toronto Argos, and all-around good guy. Thank you so much for coming in. Only the second guest that we've had here on the program. We appreciate you making time for us.
I'm thrilled to be here. This is an honor. It's a beautiful space, lovely merchandise, and I thought you were scraping the barrel when you called me. I'm really touched to hear this was your second guest. So
I'm telling you, was it Bill Murray was Letterman's first guest, I think?
That's right.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you really put a lot of thought into your first couple of guests, so you're in good company.
This is a big deal.
So, I mean, a lot of people watching are probably familiar with your work. I mean, you've done a little bit of broadcasting, right? Me and you had the opportunity to do Friday Night Lights.
I can't tell you how fun that was, actually. And a couple things came from that. One is everybody thinks they can do color play-by-play.
Oh, sure.
You're like, oh, these idiots, they might stumble on a word. You're like, get that guy out of here. I could do better than that. It's like, obviously, it's professional work. You have to know what you're doing. So thankfully, you carried the ball, and I kind of filled in little pieces here and there. It went very well, but I was impressed by how much of a technique-intensive process it is.
I'm always amazed when you watch someone like Al Michaels or Jim Nantz or Joe Buck, and you have your favorites, and some work with you and some don't. And they'll just do basically 4 hours without even stumbling on a word.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
Unreal.
It's like, he makes probably $10 million, and there's a reason for it, whether you like his style or not. That is always an amazing.
There's for me, as not a radio person, not a radio professional whatsoever, but when you can hear it inside somebody's voice, like there's a particular cadence, like there's a presence that person has on the microphone. Where in Peterborough, we always like. There's certain voices I can still hear, and I think about it, and it's funny, you can still hear like the dramatic pause, you can still hear the way that the person would talk, and you don't hear the stumbling. It's not they don't miss a beat. It continues to come out like it's natural, whether you've got 100 viewers or 25 million viewers on multiple different platforms that are slow-mowing and stopping and, capturing 30 seconds of what you said.
And that rhythm thing that you mentioned, I don't know how to do it. But when it's right, it's beautiful. When it's not, it sounds like some guy who's going, and there's the Crestwood guy trying to get up. That was good. Right. And then Jordan go, let me take it from here. And he cut in and we
that looked like a linebacker blitz, Gabe. That's what that looked like right there.
My bad.
We'll get to the professional portion of your career, but I'm interested if you could take me back to the very beginning, Gabe. Take me back to the very beginning when a young Gabe Robinson fell in love with the sport of football.
Well, to make the story a little more interesting, you always need a bit of conflict, right? So my mom didn't want me to play football. Badly did not want me to play ball. Thought I would ruin my spine. Thought I would get concussions, get hurt. And this is long before the concussion era.
She was ahead of her time.
She was and is. Now, my dad played a little bit of high school football. I don't even know how involved that was, if they had equipment, but it was a big piece of his childhood, at least. Like, I heard the stories about, I think this is like sandlot football. But it mattered to him, and the strategy and the leadership in the game meant something to him. So for me, the very beginning of football was hearing my dad talk about these pretty insignificant high school games. And again, this might have been recess for I don't even know for sure. But I did sort of collect this idea that football was important and challenging and interesting. Years go by, had no real opportunity to play. In high school, some friends of mine played, and that was kind of intriguing. I tried to join the TAS PCVS team in grade 10, and somehow I'd hurt my back in the summer and couldn't run. So I kind of missed that season, and come grade 11, I finally managed to talk my mom into letting me play. I was healthy enough to play. Craig Harris, who's now has passed away, he was really the guy who got me sort of interested. And he'd done this with a lot of guys. He'd cruise the halls at TAS and just go, hey, you look like an athlete.
Yeah.
You're going to play football. And I kind of, oh, okay. Nobody else is paying attention to me. You know? So I think he just saw big kids and thought, hey, you should play ball. And he was right. Like, it was a wonderful experience, and he had a lot to do with that. And I'm forever grateful to him. But he's a big piece of that story. And he was one of the people who actually talked my mom into thinking that I wouldn't just die of a spinal injury on the first play. So thankfully, I had a little bit of help in my corner, so to speak, from this coach who was desperate to build a team. He'd put the team together at TAS. And so in grade 11, like most kids who start playing football, I thought I'd be a quarterback. Sure. And it wasn't long before I realized that wasn't my spot. And again, back to Craig Harris, he was the one who said, since you're the second string quarterback and you're probably not, there's a couple other kids trying to be in this position, we'll put you in at cornerback so you get to play a bit. And I thought, oh man,
what a waste.
You know, what a
sure. No one dates the cornerback.
Everybody loved Craig, but at the same time, he was capable of feeding you a line.
Sure.
Right? And you know, kids, even the dumbest kids can kind of smell
Sure.
that kind of BS. And I was like, you know, I know he's setting me up. He's like, I want to be a quarterback. I want to throw the ball. Not that I could really, but I want to be this guy. And Craig's like, hey, listen, I've got this great idea. You get to start at corner, and you can take some reps at quarterback. And we went to Bancroft for our first controlled scrimmage, you know, grade 11, a week and a half into the school year. And we drive out to Bancroft. These days, you put on your pants and you sit on the bus with your pads beside the seat. And we get up there, and I think I was third or fourth in the depth chart for quarterback. And, you know, I think I'm 1 for 1. One pass thrown in football, one completion. A buddy named Grant Coons caught the ball. But in the course of that game, I realized I play defense. That made sense. And I don't know that cornerback made all the sense of the world to me at the time, but because it's really a coverage position. But in high school in those days, this was largely a running game. And I got stick my nose in there. I could tackle some guys. I was tall, light, skinny. But I had sort of a nose for the ball and the shape of the field and so on. So, and there was a real sense of belonging that came with, you know, being one of the guys who played football. And something about an identity that I think for a lot of kids is important. And it was for me to be one of those guys who did this cool thing, this tough thing.
Yeah.
It was, again, connected somehow to my dad. And a bunch of my peers, as I said, my buddies, were playing and had been playing Kinsman ball. And prior to my grade 11 year, TAS didn't have a team. TAS played connected to PCVS.
Yeah.
So when we finally separated and became our own team, we were terrible. Just terrible.
What year is this, Gabe? This is 95?
Might even
94?
be 93, 94.
Yeah. This is what I figured.
Yeah, somewhere in there. So if you know any of those details about when TAS and PC split, so we lose 3-4 games straight. Finally, we have a home game, sort of the homecoming game against PCVS, who didn't have a field, right? They didn't have a field.
They used to go to Bonnerworth Park.
That's right, and they practiced at, what's the one that lost all the trees in East City? That was it's now rugby field, of course, that one.
Oh, yeah, Nichols Oval.
Thank you. So that was, like, they'd walk or take rides up to that every day after school to practice, and we, of course, had our own field. So among my peers, this was the big game, right? This was your former opponents, and at this point, really, I hadn't figured football out. I played, I enjoyed it. Practice didn't make a lot of sense to me. You just sort of ran around a lot. It was fairly lowbrow football. Like, we didn't have a lot of plays, and at corner, you kind of cover a guy. You didn't blitz. You didn't have a bunch of different zones. We weren't running match. We weren't doing a lot of interesting stuff. And again, it was 3 quarters running game, right? You know, 3 down football, high school. The game was not strong in town, so the coaching was, I got to say, a lot of good things about these coaches, but these were not professional coaches. They had, you know, all that to say, we go into this big game, and in those days, you may remember, you could buy out to watch the game. Right?
Oh yeah.
Right?
Yep.
So $2 went to the student council, and that got you a chance to miss 4th period and watch a chunk of the football game, right?
Yeah.
So this was the first game where we had an audience of any description. And, you know, you look on that little hill at the TAS field, and there's, I'd love to aggrandize this more.
5,000, you know?
Easily 5,000. I'm thinking maybe 400.
Yeah.
But enough to make some noise.
Sure.
Yeah.
And most of them are, you know, teenagers like me, and they're not really paying attention.
No.
Sure.
But there's, you know, all
They're
these
there.
colors, and, you know, somebody's beating a drum, making a bit of noise. So you feel like people are paying attention to this, right? So this was a game between two fairly impotent teams with impotent offenses and strong, athletic, aggressive defenses. So the scores, there wasn't a lot of scoring.
Sure.
So we end regular time tied. Can't remember what the score was, but we were tied. So we go into overtime, 10-minute overtime period. I remember being near the refs when they made this call. I was not a captain, but I remember hearing pieces of this. They said, all right, guys, we're going to do one 10-minute period. And at the end of that 10-minute period, whoever's got better score wins. Well, nobody could score. So they said, we'll do another 10-minute period. Nobody scored.
Wow.
So finally, it's starting to get dark, right? This is October.
Yeah, there's
early
no
October.
lights, kids. This is
There's
93.
no lights at point. This is grass field.
Sure.
You know?
No kidding.
And how many of the 400 in the audience are
I
still
was
there?
just going to say maybe 50 or 60. Now, some people stick around because this got interesting.
Interesting,
Sure.
sure.
You know, but what's really going on is like between the 30s, like a little bit of back and forth and a lot of punting, right? So again, and by this point, we're exhausted. All of us are exhausted. The refs are exhausted. So they finally say, look, we don't really have a plan for triple overtime. But what we're going to do is we're going to have one more sudden death period. And that'll be it, right? We'll just play until this is over. Because this is the big game between the former teammates, now rivals. It's the battle of the basement. They hadn't won a game. We hadn't won a game. We weren't going to win another game. They weren't going to win another game. So the refs kind of, I think, threw us a bone. They said, like, we'll stick around, right? We'll let the game run, right?
Beautiful.
Until somebody gets a single, right? Is probably what's going to happen. So if I might flesh out the story a little bit, they were running fairly simple offense, I understand now, and it's weird how some of the stuff stays in my brain, but they ran a sweep to my side where they cracked my receiver, which let me know they were running toss sweep to my side. So I figured that out. Takes this much intelligence to figure out if they're going to crack with your guy, they're going to run to your side. Okay. And the other thing they did is they would leave both running backs early, and they'd leave the backfield, and they'd run this sort of seam pattern and usually outrun the quarterback, right? They ran that a couple times. So these two plays were kind of the only plays I noticed, right? So we go into triple overtime. I think we started with the ball, had to punt. Defense comes on the field, and my guy cracks. He goes to crack. So I bust into the backfield and take him down. 2nd and 14, right?
Beautiful.
Terrible tackle. Put my knees on the ground, sort of lay on him, and he tripped over my shoulders. Not a good tackle. Didn't even spike him. I just kind of fell in front of him because I didn't know how, partly.
Sure.
Right? I'd played at this point 3 football games, right? But something about my instincts got me to the ball, right? So that was cool. And then now they're in a passing situation, 2nd and 14 or 15, and both running backs leave the backfield early. And I tell you, I've seen this one, right? You guys go down the seams. So I guess I didn't worry about my guy. I don't know what I did about the guy I was supposed to cover, but I sort of ran to where the ball should be. And I don't know I know you play baseball. So you know that if there's a ball that you have to field and you just run to it and you run and you run and you just catch it, it's easy, right? If you sit down in the right place and wait, it gets kind of hairy, right? Mm-hmm. You're like, should I move? Should I? And you think, how do I do this again? Right? Like you have time and it gets kind of weird. Yeah,
Sure.
You don't want to have to think about it.
Right.
Well, I arrived at what would be the interception point remarkably early. Not because I was good, but I saw the ball leave his hand and I went, I'm in the right place. And like time sort of stopped. I started to think, I wonder if I should do stuff. And I could feel the guys, the intended receivers on my back a bit. I'm like, I know I'm in the right place, but my legs wanted to go. Anyway, long story short, I caught the ball. And really, at that moment, didn't know what to do, right? I didn't know what to do. I mean, I knew I should probably start to run, but another eternity elapsed, and I went, oh, right, you're supposed to return the ball. I'd never held the ball in a game other than that one pass, and I had a few handoffs at Bancroft. So I start to run, and somehow these two guys behind me didn't tackle me. So I'm running, and eventually, again, this felt like a weird eternity. I remember all this stuff so crisply. I end up on something like the 25-yard line. I run into one or two of their offensive linemen, at which point I'm hit in the back by my teammates who drive me another 10 yards and nearly knock me out with this impact in the back. So there's a rugby scrum, and we're elated. We go running off the field. We got the ball back, and we put, for the first time in that game probably, put our offense in scoring position.
Sure.
At this biggest of moments, right? So we go off the field. Offense loses yardage on first down, loses yardage on second down, and hits the field goal to win the game.
All right.
Come on.
Grade 11 kid, Suddenly, it seemed to make sense. I was invited to the party.
Yeah.
The cool older kids talk to me now.
Sure, right.
And it was one of those classic Peterborough High School parties. Like,
Yeah.
all the things. You might remember Nathan Carveth. He got beat up, as he did every party.
What other school showed up? Crestwood showed up.
So the
or
Peterborough
Canner
version
showed
of
up.
Jordan Mercier, whoever this guy
Well,
is.
no, I mean, I don't want to speak ill of Nathan because he was a good guy, and unfortunately he died. Lovely guy. But he had this reputation of going to parties, picking fights, and getting beaten up.
Sure.
Night after night. Anyway, so that happened.
That is a typical high school Peterborough party.
Yeah.
Another school would show up, and then it's on.
That's right. And
Brutal.
I mean, I don't think there was a lot of this stuff because the guy holding the party, I won't name him, was sort of a well-known, well-liked druggy guy.
Sure.
There's the druggy guy. So there were rooms full of people doing bottle tokes with hashish, and there were rooms full of people arguing about whether Canadian or Molson export was better.
Yeah.
That argument,
Oh, for
there was
sure.
a bonfire. And lots of awkward teenagers. And suddenly, people thought I was cool.
Yeah.
Like on the spot, right?
Yeah.
Which, up to that point, was not the case.
Mercier, this is 90s Peterborough at its absolute finest. So when I check the dates, 93, 94. So there's not a long, steeped and rich tradition of Peterborough football for mid-70s through to the early 90s here in Peterborough. Not at all. I don't know. There might have been some schools that continued programs, but there was partnership programs, PCVS for sure. Because I think after Thomas A., it went to Kenner. I think Kenner and PCVS had, in 94, had their own team, and then Kenner went out on their own, and St. Pete's came back, because I was on the first football team in 95.
That was after my time, I think, because we never played St. Pete's.
So
they had a junior team.
We had a junior team,
yeah.
So we didn't have a senior team in 95. We started with junior team, I think. Anyways, but those parties, that's 100% what it was. It was, that was a nice trip down memory lane for that.
Well, you've been to all those parties.
I was fortunate enough to go to a few of them. I wasn't the cool kid, so I didn't. Friday night, I had to study.
Yeah.
I don't believe that for a second.
Well, anyhow.
There's so much of that. First of all, Gabe, I said coming into this with Mark, I said I didn't make notes because Gabe's going to take us on some wild adventure. And we've chatted. I've interviewed you 50 times. I've never heard anything close to that story. So thank you for sharing that with us.
That's
awesome.
kind of the beginning.
I knew it was going to end with either you making a big play or getting burned for a touchdown.
I wanted to leave that in the balance. So you had to guess. Yeah.
It's interesting that you didn't actually start playing organized football until grade 11. Most people, nowadays, kids start 5, 6.
That Pop Warner in the States is 5 and 6, right?
Yeah.
Locally now, with guys like Jeff Allen and a few of these guys who are running these young teams, I think you can get going at 9 and 10. I don't think it's contact. I don't think it's 12 aside. But you're playing the game, you're learning footwork, you're throwing the ball around, you're having fun.
Did Gabe Robinson, prior to that grade 11, you said you didn't play, you played 4 years of ball to get to U of T, to tell the story a little bit forward, but before then, any organized sports, any inkling of wanting to play any other sport?
My dad wanted me to play soccer because that was his game, right? And we originally lived in Kingston. We moved from the West Coast to Kingston, and they had quite a developed soccer program. And we had to move to Peterborough because my dad got hired at Trent. And I was sort of sad to find that the soccer program in Peterborough at the time, I think it's come a long way now.
Yeah.
At the time was really poor. They just sort of put you on the field and that was it, Met a few kids, but I didn't stick with it. It didn't really have the energy I wanted. I eventually talked my mom into letting me play some box lacrosse. And I did play field lacrosse from grade 9 at TAS.
Oh, right.
Don Barry was our coach.
Sure.
The legend.
Dude,
Yeah.
I have such a soft spot for Don. I saw him a couple years ago, and I swear he couldn't remember who I was. And that's totally fine. I didn't take any offense from that. But as a kid, he was a big part of my sort of grade 9, grade 10 year, partly because he just went, you've got some talent. You're playing senior. I went, what? And the other thing is, I think in one of those practices down on the island at TAS,
Oh, yeah.
the truth is in field lacrosse, you have to go into the middle and catch a ball and get a shot and take a hit. That's a big piece of the game.
Absolutely.
Right? If you're not willing to take that hit, you'll never get the shot. You'll never get the goal. So as a kid who was, in grade 9 and played a little bit of box, I was willing to go into the middle to try to take those shots. not really knowing that that was kind of a manly maneuver, just like that seemed like what you had to do. And yeah, you got knocked over sometimes because the Peterborough Petes went to our school, right?
Sure.
And in those days, the Petes were not a strong team, and they would be golfing, so to speak, pretty early in the playoff round. And Don, as the guy who handled the Petes at TAS, forced all those kids to play lacrosse with us. So we'd be a couple weeks into the season, and then suddenly Jude Rutland, Eric, what was his name? Boy, I'm going to forget a bunch of these names. These were the celebrities of the day from the Petes at the time. Kelly Vipond, great lacrosse player in his own right, was playing for the Petes at the time. These guys would show up, and Don would take us to Orangeville for these tournaments. Doug Searle, best lacrosse player I ever played with, right? And these guys who didn't have a lot of lacrosse experience, but were dominant athletes, right? And they're also man children. Right?
That's right.
Part of what's going on with sports at that level is the kids just matured 2 years early. So now they're playing semi-professional hockey in some town they'd never heard of until that point, right? Anyway, now they're being forced to play lacrosse, and they're taking it pretty easy. But so I would go into the middle trying to make these, like trying to impress everybody, and somebody would knock the lights out of me.
Yeah.
And Don thought that was the coolest thing. Like I was doing this on purpose. Like, this kid knows that's how you play field lacrosse.
Sure.
Like I didn't know what the hit was coming. There was space. I went to the ball. I probably missed it anyway.
Sorry, Don. Not to pull back the wool here, man.
He loved the fact that I would go to the net like that and take the shot. So he dragged me to these tournaments, played with the seniors. I'd play third line midi and do okay, But that was a sort of special thing. So to answer your question, I did play a couple of those. I think I did a year of volleyball. I did a year of basketball. Was bad at those sports. And it wasn't until I started to mature a bit into grade 11 and find football that it started to make some sense in terms of what you had to do as an athlete,
Yeah.
You only played 2 years, and then all of a sudden, or did you go to grade 13 at the time?
I did basically a victory lap after OAC.
Oh, wow.
I was going to say,
So you're in high school for 5 or 6 years.
90s Peterborough. There was lots of guys. There were men that were playing football at 20 years old.
That's right.
There was a Kenner hockey team. And we can go back into the annals and find out. There was guys that were 21 years old playing high school hockey.
And they were killers. Kenner was known as
killers. They were men.
Yeah.
Bob Davis and Tracy Koluski and Todd Richard and John Grant.
Rapid Robert.
No, Robert is 75. He didn't play on these teams.
Played against Gretzky.
He played when hockey rinks were black and white still. I remember going. Right. I had a friend that played on Adam Scott, and we went to his first. And he was a good hockey player, like above average, certainly. Played for the Muskies. He went in Adam Scott. He was 14, and he is 5'3", 140, and the Kenner government out with beards. These are Bob Davis was a huge human being when you're 5'3" and 120 pounds, and you're playing hockey, and he's playing defense.
In those days, I think there was an overage cap at 21, and if you were in school, you could play high school sports.
Sure.
And there was no after 4 years you can't play anymore. There's nothing like that. And there was grade 13.
That's
which meant
right.
you could play grade 14 or grade 15 as long as you're enrolled.
Right.
So I played grade 11. We went 1-7. I think we beat.
You won the game. The big
PCBS
game.
is the only team that I never lost to in high school football. Hamilton is the only team I never lost to in pro, just to say it. So I played grade 12, and we went 3-3 and lost in the playoffs. And grade 13 and grade 14, we won the Central Ontario Championships. And it was hugely important to me.
When do you start getting calls or whatever about, okay, there's the possibility I'm going to play university football?
I think what happens,
like, you have like 8 scouts at every game looking at Gabe?
No, I think, and if they were, I was oblivious and didn't even have the sense to think they might be interested in me. I think what happens is if you are in a successful program, the scouts in the region, and most of them are guys who just went to the school and they went to Laurier or whatever, and they just pay attention to football in the region. So if you have a successful team, they went to a couple games, they went, oh, that Jordan kid, he's good. He's good. So if you then win a championship, which we did in my third year, they go, well, let's make the rounds. We're looking for guys who have an ability to get into our school. That's a big piece, right? That's yes, no, right at the beginning. And we're looking for guys who have the frame into which they can grow, and we're looking for guys who like football and look like they can play. So not a lot of kids can fit all of those bills, even though those aren't very high standards, right? But if you're going to end up at U of T, you've got to have a good average to start with just to begin with.
Right.
So the scouts came around just because we had success as a team. And I think what then happens for most of them is they go to the head coaches and they go, who should I talk to? Because they didn't come to all your games.
Sure.
There's no TV stuff. There's nothing. Nobody's
Not cutting the tape.
Yeah.
There's
Gabe,
nothing
Maybe
big like that, right?
The kid that they had heard of, he has a terrible game, doesn't show well or whatever. Or you caught the kid that had lightning in a bottle that night.
Yeah.
He scores 4 touchdowns, but really, he's not the kid. So, yeah, that's a fair take. You would go over. Who would have been the coach?
Our coach at the time was Craig Harris and Jeff Chalice.
Chalice, right.
They were our coaches. So,
Yeah. Chalice has been around for 100 years, no?
well, Chally, it's funny because
He's still only 55.
yeah, he's getting close to retiring.
Yeah, that's
if
what I
he's
mean.
even that old.
If he's even that old.
Chally, Craig Muir, Sarah Mitchell. There was a whole bunch of young people. I think of them kids now, but they were this whole group of teachers that came into task right when my group of kids came in, our cohort. So those significant sports figures as coaches, there's a lump of them. And along with that, strangely enough, my group happened to be a big cohort of pretty bright, big, fast, aggressive, athletic kids. So there was a dozen plus of us in each of those grades that came up. So then you cobble together a football team, and that's all you need.
Yeah,
and
you're
some
right.
coaches who are excited to do this. And we had a whole bunch of the farmer kids from Keene.
Sure.
Who were up at 5 milking cows and were not complaining about a sore finger, right?
Right.
And a bunch of us rough and tumble East City boys who, of varying levels of privilege.
Sure.
But we also, East City wasn't a rough part of town, but, there were mixed income housing and there was a little bit of that edge to the spot. And some of us were desperate to seem tough anyway.
Sure.
Right? It's just what you do when you're a kid. So that added up to this cohort of big kids who were willing to practice in the cold and in the goose down on the island because
no kidding. Oh my gosh.
And bang into each other. And man, we tried to kill our offense every practice. We tried to kill them because they were putting us. Well, we say, in Canadian football, you don't get 10 yards in 2 tries. Defense is back, and we play most of special. So we're like, just drive for Christ's sake.
Yeah.
And so we get into practice. It's like, yeah, you made us play the whole damn game, and we would try to kill them every play.
When I played high school football, there was some programs that had it that they were. Crestwood was an animal.
Yeah.
Like they had Sinopoli and Sharp, I think, were Don Sharp and Sam Sinopoli, I believe, were the coaches then.
I think they had 4 or 5 other grown men doing position coaching, right?
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
And so in today's game, my son plays high school football. He plays for Holy Cross. And it's way different today.
Yeah.
The quality of the coaching is certainly something. Like when I was a kid, like Jerry Peters coming from Dallas or wherever it was that he came from.
Somewhere.
Cincinnati.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
And him talking about Friday Night Lights, like it didn't equate here. You get 20,000 kids out to a high school football game on Friday nights where I came from.
Unreal, huh?
Oh my gosh. But a lot of times it was built around, if you had an athlete, he was at a particular position. It was a quarterback. It was the running back. It was never, if you were the best, they didn't put the best athlete at receiver because you needed the kid to get the ball to you.
Yeah.
Right? The middle linebacker, an area of prominence where it was the biggest, meanest kid. He played on defense. And if he did, he either played end or he played middle linebacker,
That's right.
seemed like.
Yep.
So for you guys, was it the same sort of thing? Like the quarterback was the feature or?
Oh, man, no. And I love our quarterback. Joel Vardy was his name. And he lives in Port Hope now. I think the world of the guy. And a lot of our success, especially in my grade 13 year, I owe to him because he worked so hard and did such a great job of the leadership piece. Figured out our playbook, led the guys. We had I'll never forget it. We won in Halliburton against a really, really strong team. And it came down to him audibling down the field for a touchdown in the dying minutes of the game.
Wow.
And we had to go on and hold out for 2.5 minutes and somehow kept them out of the end zone. And
Wasn't there a kid in Halliburton that went to the Eskimos?
Mike Bradley?
Yeah.
I blew his ACL in the following season on a tackle. And
Wow.
we did go together to Edmonton actually for one of these like Future Stars camps in the university level. And no, he's a phenomenal athlete.
Yeah.
Phenomenal and a lovely guy, man. I always liked the guy. I forget where we were, but at some point he was drunk. It was after some kind of football event, and he was like, "You're the guy that destroyed my knee." I'm like, I really didn't mean too much.
Sorry, dude.
You know?
Yeah.
But no, our team, and that's an interesting question. I hadn't thought about it that way, because generally you would just put the best guys at those 2 or 3 spots. And maybe there's a bit of that on defense. Size dictates a lot of this. But,
For sure.
Our best football player was definitely not our quarterback.
Right.
You know,
Sure.
We had a brilliant athlete at running back. Both our quarterback and running back, Jason Stoddard, went on to play at Guelph. I don't think they played a lot, but they were part of those teams, and those were good years for Guelph. Other than that, I was the only other one who went through. But I think we had a whole pile of really strong athletes, and nobody was sort of going, "Well, what, I have to play safety?"
Sure.
Or guard or anything. You know, we found spots for everybody, and people figured out their roles, grew into it, and pulled together. It was a hell of a team. You know?
Defense is a different animal too. You know, like there seems to be, when you're a ball hawking defense, it's a way different attitude than it is. You know, it is particularly if you're playing against a strong offense and you're getting just steamed, like you never seem to getting them on the 2 and outs. Like you're never seeming to get there. They're just driving all day on you. It's different though when if you've got high school football specifically, if you got 4 or 5 kids that are animals, like that they're into that sort of that physicality. They want to crush you. They have the head on the swivel. They can see the kid that's just tunnel visioned, you know, looking right here, and here they're going to jam it right in your ear hole, like you're going to eat it. That's a very difficult high school football team to defeat at that point.
We had 10 or 11 of those guys on that defense, and the speed was amazing. And, you know, I've coached a bunch of high school ball since, and I know there's this weird shift where you go, you know, kids are different, right? Humans have been saying that about kids forever. Like, life was this hard when I was a kid, and now the kids, you know, that whole story. But, like, most of the teams I'm around now, there's a couple of those guys. Yeah. And I swear, like, we had 10, 11, maybe 12 of those on our defense. Sure. And that's why we were so good, won. Right?
Yeah,
like,
sure.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
And we didn't have guys who were kind of going, well, I don't want to play safety. We had guys who were like, I'm the safety. You know, Jason Hughes was one of the guys. Unfortunately, I think his brother just died. I feel for him. But, yeah, we were really lucky that way. And there wasn't any of this trip about who gets the showy position.
Sure.
You know? Really, we had Joel, our quarterback, was a heck of a football player and a terrible quarterback, you know? And I love the guy forever for what he did for us as a group. And I think he'd tell you himself he was not much of a quarterback. But, man, he could lead, and he cared, and he did it when it mattered, you know? His son, I think, Harry Vardy is his name, is a hot prospect going into university this year. Keep an eye out. He might end up at Queens, I'm not sure.
So let's assume you absolutely kill it at U of T, right? Like did you get the sense of, oh, I might be able to play pro? Or like, how did that sort of happen?
It's sort of a strange story, because when, like high school, I'll just jump back for a moment. I finished grade 13, and as a young man, I thought I was cool. I was like over the high school thing. Last thing I'm going to do is go back for a victory lap. That's the stupidest thing in the world. Craig Harris called me in August, and he said, listen, you can do a co-op and play football. I'm like, I'm never going back to high school. Like, I didn't even go to my own graduation. I thought I was too cool. Like, stupid, but too cool, right? And he said, no, like, you'll get to do this thing. And I said, okay, I'll think about it. So actually, my friend Zach Burke's dad, David Burke, who used to paint at that building.
Yeah.
I went to see David and said, can I like do a co-op with you and get to play football? You know, sweep the floors, whatever. And Zach had introduced me to David as the best artist at TAS, which is cool. I don't know how accurate it was, but that's the way they'd sort of jive together. And David just said, no, if you're going to be with me, you're going to be painting. Okay, great. So I had this like beautiful swan song for 2.5 months where I went to practice at 3:30 or whatever it was and spent the days painting my own paintings under David Burke's tutelage.
Really?
Yeah. So
where is a Gabe Robinson original now?
Well,
these are the sort of artifacts that the Capital PTBO's after.
All right, I'll get you
Whistler's mother, Mona Lisa, Gabe.
Well, David taught me a whole lot of stuff, and I still do some oil painting to this day.
Wow.
And I'll get you painting at some point.
Rad.
So all this to say, I did this victory lap, and even when I would have sworn up and down, I'm never going to do anything to do with high school again. And it was one of the happiest couple of months of my life. Like, wonderful time painting. We won the championship again. Fun sidebar of the sidebar is, I remember the first game we played Crestwood, and I must have made 30 tackles. And I came off the field going, this is unsustainable. And by the last game of the season, I couldn't get there. I couldn't get to the ball ahead of the rest of these kids. And it was a much younger group. I'm grade 14. I'm a 19-year-old, right? And most of our team is balancing out at grade 11, grade 12. And again, they didn't know what to do in the first game. And in the last game, I couldn't buy a tackle. I got 3 tackles in the final game, right? Anyway, I was so proud of that group and so happy.
The examiner wasn't pleased with that performance, by the way. They thought, bust, three tackles.
Scathing review from Dale
Where was he? Anyway, we went and beat the Quinty team for the championship. So anyway, I was not going to go back to high school, and I did. I finished 4 years at U of T, and they were not good years on the football field. We were terrible. I think we won 2 games in that time. We did win the last game at Varsity Stadium, which the old cement, decrepit, leaky old stadium, grass field. I was glad to get to play on that piece of Canadian football history. It was time to get a new stadium, of course. But we beat Windsor in that last game, and that, I think, by a field goal or something, and it was pretty clutch. And, you know, after that long, I mean, it took me a long time to kind of admit it, but, like, I was emotionally wounded after 4 years of sucking at football.
Yeah,
I poured my heart
2
into
wins
it.
over 4
2
years.
wins,
It's
right?
crazy.
That's
You know?
hard.
Now, I actually played in my first game. I played in the first play of my first game of my university career, and you shouldn't. You're not ready. We were at Guelph, and we had the ball on their 1 yard line with 30 seconds left, and we couldn't get in to win. And we lost the second game by a point or something. And at that,
That's tough.
Wheels fell off.
yeah, it was it, right? So we were this close and didn't know how to win, didn't know how to get it done. Had a couple of bad calls. You don't give the ball to the smallest guy on the field at that moment. That's one of the stories, right? But yeah, it really hurt me, as it would. You put so much into this, and I was a bit too dumb and out of touch with my own self and my own emotional space to sort of even admit that there was anything wrong. But it kind of not screwed me up, but it hurt. It hurt, and it was maybe not post-traumatic stress disorder, but it was hard. And I tried, man. I trained and I tried, and we didn't have the numbers, we didn't have the bodies, we didn't have and the other teams did. We're losing a Western. This team's amazing, right? And we held our own in some cases, and we got blown out 70 in some games, right?
Sure.
So by the end of my 4th year, it felt like my tour of duty was done. I had done my thing. It was my draft year. Nobody's paying attention to the 1-7 team who beat the other 1-7 team by 1 field goal, right? So I knew the draft was coming up, and nobody showed any interest, and I didn't give it a lot more thought. I thought, football was great in high school, and I'm glad I played in university, but I was still kind of, I don't know, again, emotionally kind of worn out by it all, right? And my coach approached me in, again, like late July, which in what would come to be my 5th year, and said, why don't you come back for one last season? I'm like, screw that.
Right.
No way. And he said, listen, I think this is probably illegal, but he's like, I can get you housing. All you have to do is get into the school, defer your payments, and you don't have to put any money down until October or whatever, November, right? And I was like, well, if you're going to put me up downtown Toronto,
Sure.
and all this time I've been playing lacrosse sort of on the sly. Like, I play football on Saturday, get crippled, play 3 games of lacrosse on Sunday, like 3 different weekends. And then I get to play for the lacrosse team in the playoffs because they make the playoffs. We don't, right?
Sure.
So as long as I get into 3 games, I'm on the roster,
good.
right? So two sports. That was actually pretty fun. Redeemed because we won a few games. It's sort of cool.
Peterborough's Deion Sanders.
Yeah, that's right.
Wow, that's Bo Jackson.
Yeah.
Let's
Yeah,
use
Bo
Bo
Jackson.
Jackson.
Bo, good reference.
So anyway, I thought, well, geez, like nothing else is going on, right? I finished university. I was just sort of chilling and trying to recover in some ways because university is a big deal. You do a lot of stuff, and so I agreed. I moved back to Toronto for just what added up to 3 months. I played my 5th year. The way that, to answer your question, Jordan, at the end of that season, I think we were 0-8, And I played pretty well, but I mean, honestly, I've watched a couple of those games, and I'm getting blocked by 3 guys on every play, right? So you don't get any sacks. You don't get many tackles, right? They're game planning for 2 guys on defense. Me and this middle linebacker is pretty good, Derek Wheeler.
It's like Aaron Donald with the Rams.
Yeah, no kidding.
Like but
you're U of T's Aaron Donald.
Well, that's really generous, but he still gets sacks.
Still gets sacks.
Like,
That's
and
true.
Anyway, I got a bunch of good plays, but I was getting just shelled. It felt like anyway. So that season ended. We go to have our little year-end banquet where they give out these plaques, and there's a fellow named Nick Volpe, who was the Canadian, I think he's the director of Canadian scouting for the Argonauts. And he was a U of T alumni. I think he played back when you had like leather boots and like the old days. Leather hats and
3 yards in a cloud of dust.
Yeah.
Sure.
I mean, I think he played there, and I know he played for the Argos, and it was probably in the 50s or 60s that he played. So he I believe he's died now, but lovely guy. And he was like the guest hand you your trophy guy, right? And I know I gave a speech for the team, and I know it was really well received. I wish I knew what I said. I can't remember a single word. You guys, you speak professionally, and you probably are a little more self-aware. For me, I just sort of jumped in and said all the stuff, and there's a standing ovation. I went, wow, at least I didn't embarrass myself. But anyway, I was up at the podium 4 or 5 times for a couple of different things like top defensive lineman, just who else? Leading tackler on defense. So these kinds of things, just basic little words. They have a little plaque for you. And after the 3rd or 4th, I'm standing there kind of holding it with Nick, and we shake hands, and there's a smile, and he said something like, hey, maybe we can get you a contract to go with all of this hardware. And I kind of went, oh yeah, like that's nice of you to say.
Funny one-liner or whatever. Yeah.
Like really what I thought in the moment was, this is a compliment, not a serious thing. So that ended, September, October, November ended. My so-called illegal lease ended. I moved back to Peterborough. I got back to Peterborough, and I settled back into what would be civilian life, and thought, I was glad I did that. That was great. And, I'm chasing girls, and I'm playing in a rock band, doing all this fun stuff in Toronto.
Holy smokes.
What
is this, Peterborough? We went from Peterborough's Deion Sanders, Bo Jackson to Peterborough's Patrick Swayze.
Definitely.
I have not roundhouse kicked anybody's head off.
Jeepers. That's about the only thing you've missed here.
It was a wonderful time. And it was a bit like that victory lap at high school, right? I got to just hang out and write rock songs and chase girls. So anyway, what happened coming into December, and I was living over here at one of Murray Carslake. I don't know if you know him.
My goodness.
One of his old rentals with no insulation.
Please.
We had a broken furnace. We couldn't afford to heat the place.
Murray. Cheapers.
I got out of university with $6,000 in debt, which is pretty darn good. So I remember thinking, I wonder how serious Nick was with this offer. And if he was serious, I'm going to have to prepare.
Right.
So it took me a little while, but I finally got his phone number, and I phoned him up back when you just called people out of the blue. Certainly couldn't text him. And said, Nick, I don't know if you remember me. It's Gabe. He said, oh, yeah, I remember you. And I said, how serious were you about that? Because I would have to get in shape, right? And he said, no, we're serious. We'd like to invite you to this open camp we're having. And I went, okay, I'm going to keep going, right? And when you've been training for football, there's this sort of rhythm to it. You just keep going, right? You get back in the gym, and you get back on the track, and you get back on the protein powder and all that stupid stuff. So I thought, okay, like if you're going to get a shake at this, a sniff at this, you got to go. We got to do this. And like, what else am I doing at that moment, right? I'm working carpentry again, which I like, but this is like the only sniff of pro if I'm ever going to get it. And I thought at that point, like, if I could get into the Sky Dome at the time, with an Argos jersey on. This is the team I liked when I was a little kid, right?
Sure.
I'll have done it.
Yeah.
Right? I'll have done it, right? And so I start training, and a guy named Sheldon Benoit, who was playing for Edmonton at the time, I forget how I met him, but he helped me train. He was a CFL veteran. Great guy. Helped me a whole bunch. So I trained through the winter. I'd drive down to York. We'd use their indoor track, whatever. I kept working. I realized I was a little behind with respect to what the pro level is going to be. But another aside, the jump between high school and university is huge, right? The average age of your opponent goes up 4 years on the spot, right?
Sure.
University to pro, it's faster, it's crisper, but it's not going to leave you spinning, right? It's a big change, but it's not like you're nowhere near. Like you're in your prime, you know?
Yeah.
Everybody else is too. So it wasn't a huge hurdle, but I was a little nervous. I didn't know what to think. And I was some fear of failure in the midst of all this, you know? Like, how much am I going to spend of time and energy to go get cut by the Argos? Like,
Sure.
Some of that stuff. When you look back now, you go, if you have that chance, who cares?
Take it.
Yeah.
You take that shot,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So thankfully I took the shot, and I wasn't too crippled by my own ego or the chance of failing, because that's happened before, you know? So I went for it, and what I realized is that he'd only invited me to this open camp, which is a real joke. Right, this is where the guys who come and harass the coaches on the sidelines during season go, hey, you know, I can punt. You want to let me punt? So they go, okay, fine, go to this camp, right? And it's the mini camp, which means the actual quarterbacks show up. A bunch of real scrubs come along out of the community, and some of that's just like throw them a bone, let them run a route. You know, someone's going to throw a few balls to them, and they never take anybody from these things, right? Thankfully, about 2 weeks before this, Nick called and said, you know, I want to offer you a real contract. So I didn't even know what I missed, but I had a buddy who was going to this open camp, and he was unfortunately injured and really didn't get a chance to show himself, even though he was a hell of an athlete. But that wasn't going to be the track. I didn't even realize how close I came to missing, because that's like for people, they just want to like have people for the quarterbacks to throw to.
Yeah,
like it's not,
sure.
You're not picking any of these guys, right? So I got to bypass that, which was great. A couple of days later, I go into rookie camp, which is the real camp. All the veterans aren't there yet. It's mostly American kids, handful of us rookies. And they're working out looking for guys who are kind of at the last stop of their career coming out of the States. A lot of these guys who played Div 2, and they're good, but they're not going anywhere, right? So they end up in an Argos camp or a Stampeders camp or whatever. And they're fodder, right? They take a whole bunch of reps, they learn a bunch of stuff. Maybe they'll go on somewhere else, get picked. But so there's 2-3 days of that. Then the veterans come. And so that's how it kind of started. And it's amazing how little you know in the moment, right? How little you understand of this dynamic. As I said, I didn't even understand that I just dodged this total joke of a mini camp thing. And then you go into actual camp, and the whole thing, camp's wild. It's like this, it's 10 years packed into 10 days. And at the same time, it's over in an instant. You're completely exhausted. I was really overwhelmed by it all. It's a tremendous culture shock, because, I mean, even just the fact that it's pretty much 1/5 Canadians, maybe at the most.
Sure.
Staff and everything else, right? So it's basically Yanks. And lots of great guys, but there's even some racial divide, which I didn't really understand at this time. You know, Black Americans behave differently than white Americans.
Sure.
And as a young kid, I thought those guys both were super cool. In 15 minutes, you're talking like you're an American. You pick up the accents.
Sure.
It's really bizarre. And again, these are guys who played university football or college football that was light years ahead of anything I had been around in terms of money and support and structure.
Sure.
This is like the Jerry Peters stuff, right?
Yeah,
they played in those 4,000 to 8,000 people coming to watch them. These high school stadiums in the States that have 20,000 people coming, right? They are all coming from that track. And I'm like, I went to U of T, I won 2 games. Like,
Sure.
you know? And so it's funny, and all of these guys who you see as being like studs, they're built like Tarzan, they're great looking guys, they're powerful, they're really good, and they're getting cut, picked off, right?
Wow.
Then there's this big cut, and you're going like, I know they're cutting 25 people tomorrow, right? And all you do is you walk into the change room, and there's like half as many lockers, because they build all these extra lockers into the change room. A whole bunch of them are gone. I think I've told you the story before. Yeah. And eventually on the big day, everybody's getting more and more tense.
Yeah.
And you walk in, and they cut the roster down to, this is the second last cut, I think you get down to like 65 or maybe it's 55. And everybody's chill. Right? All those middle temporary lockers are gone. They just have the main team.
Right.
And you're like, nobody tells you made the team.
Sure.
They tell you if you don't.
Yeah.
Right? Otherwise, you just keep showing up. And,
Right.
And I remember sitting there going, I made the team. Like,
Yeah.
okay, so now you go to preseason games, right? You got that far. They're going to make more cuts.
And like to reference, this 2003 Argos team is nothing like what you would have experienced as a team or success-wise at the U of T.
Nothing like it.
Like, this is a franchise that's fresh off a couple of Grey Cups, and like Damon Allen is the quarterback.
He showed up. I can't remember what year. Yeah, he came that year. That was his first
Yeah.
year. Yep. And
Like-
a whole bunch of names, like guys I knew.
Right, sure. No kidding. You'd watch on TV. Clemens is the coach, no?
Yeah, Masadi's receivers coach.
Yeah.
You know, there's all these
Noel
guys.
Prefontaine.
Pre's
Yeah,
there,
that's
who's a hell
right.
of a player. Great golfer, too. I watched him get an albatross once.
I think you
I think I
told me
told
that.
you
That's
this?
crazy.
Yeah, quite a
A
player.
2 on a par 5?
That's right.
Holy.
Yeah.
That's huge. But so, you know, going back to it, as that goes from 65 down to 55, you start to look around. Like, you know, there's guys that are made men on this team.
Yes.
You're not getting cut. You know, you're just happy to get to the locker type thing.
And what you really don't understand, back to the idea of the things you don't get as a kid, is the ratio stuff. Like, there's only going to be 12 Canadians in that room,
Sure.
whatever the number is, right?
Right.
They're supposed to be 7 starters, and they fudge it a little bit. So the especially the American guys would be like, I remember Johnny Scott. He was a hell of a defensive lineman, and he's like, you know, they're going to cut me tomorrow. I'm like, how do you know? And he's like, well, it's a numbers game. He's like, look, Canadian, American, there's no room for me.
Wow.
What? You're amazing at playing defensive tackle and have all this experience, and you've been on the team last year. And he's like, no, I'm gone. And sure enough, next day he's like, peace. What? He went to Hamilton, played the rest of the season. But yeah, you just don't see how precious is the wrong word, but they have to put Canadians in these slots. And they aren't necessarily good football players.
Sure.
I was a decent football player. I was good enough to play in the league for 10 years as one of these Canadians who plays a bunch of specials and gets a bit of time as a starter, maybe here and there. But the starter Canadians are mostly guys with citizenship because their mom's Canadian who played at Bucknell for 4 years
Sure.
and started. So he's a Canadian,
Right.
but his experience is American, which makes him a hot prospect, right?
Sure. Commodity.
So, that's right. And otherwise, as a Canadian, you're just going, you don't understand that they need you, right? You're thinking, well, I'm on the block. Like, I got to be better than I am. And
Were there many other Canadians at the position that you played?
no, there was a guy named Chuck Walsh, and also great guy, Walshy, they called him. And
Clever.
So, yeah, really creative, actually. You wouldn't have seen that one coming. Funny how Robinson doesn't work for any of those kinds of.
You weren't Robbie?
Yeah, Robbie?
Never, you know,
no?
I was
Gabe the Babe?
Nah, nobody in football called me that.
Oh, I like that one.
Yeah.
I think
I like the qualifier you put on it, too.
Yeah,
Not
well-
in football.
people have made that joke before because, rhyming is pretty cool.
It's all about alliteration.
That's alliteration
That's
and rhyme.
true.
That's true.
Yeah, those are
for
two
nicknames.
go-tos.
And if you can put a Y sound at the end,
Yeah, that's right. The hockey, that Canadianizes it. Robbie, what a beauty. You know,
or
like-
ER is a good one.
Sure, that's right, yeah.
Yeah. Robber would have worked.
So you're going, okay, you're 10 years in the CFL.
I could have, right?
Sure, could have.
Yeah.
But that moment in time, that era, if you brought it forward 20 years now, it's largely different. It's the exact same.
Jeez, I don't know.
But
I would assume it's the same.
But you're on the kids side of it now, right? Like
Yeah.
your coaching side of it. You're trying to bring these kids on. You're trying to develop the kids first as human beings.
Sure.
Right? Like you're trying to make them better people, better men, better women, whatever the case is, so that they can be productive members of society. Not necessarily so that they can wear 93 and, play defensive end for the Argos.
Sure.
But that from the athletic standpoint, it's still the same. It's still a numbers game. It's still the shot is still 1 in a million.
Yeah, I think
Right?
it is about 1 in a million. Yeah.
Like it really is. How many kids are playing high school ball in relation to how many guys are playing the CFL that are Canadian? Right?
Yeah.
It's a lot.
It's quite a filter, yeah.
So what's the message? I mean, when you tell somebody we won 2 games in 5 years, that I played 4 years of high school football. I never played below the age of 16 or 15 years old. I went to college, or went to university. I won 2 games in 5 years, and I've got a Grey Cup ring. Right? Like the road's not the same for everybody.
No, true enough.
So for the kid that's listening now or playing now, what do you tell that kid?
It'd be tough to say anything meaningful that wasn't a bunch of cliches about
Sure.
giving her and so on. But I guess, as boring an answer as this might be, that's all I did. I cared about this. I tried hard. I had some gifts that were exploitable in the sense that I was, like, again, I'm going back to the idea. You come out of high school, if you're trying to get to the university level, which is the step you have to take, right? If you don't have the marks, you're out. If you don't have the length, the body type, you're out. If you don't have the feet, you're out. If you don't have the speed, you're out. There's a big list of things that if you just don't have one of those, it's over, right? So the kids who can put a handful of those things together and have a chance. And one of those things is, of course, going to university. There's lots of great athletes, lots of great football players who just aren't going to school. They're not going to get a criminology degree at U of T, right? And there's a lot of players in the CIS who are faking going to school, right? We know that.
Sure.
Just like there were guys at high school who were faking going to high school because they want to play football, which in a way is sort of sad.
Sure.
In a way, it's like, hey, football is a great thing to get to do for the 5 minutes of your life that you get a chance. Do it, right? So what do I tell the kid who's trying? I would say don't lose sight of the other parts of life. And it's a vanishingly small opportunity if you get the chance. And I say this to kids that I coach. It's like, you get to play football for 5 minutes in your life, right? And you at 17 or 18, you have no idea what I mean. I didn't understand. I'm sure adults tried to make this point to me, but you didn't. This was your life at the time. Sure, you had other stuff. You went to class, you had friends, you did other stuff. But at least for me, I maybe in a slightly crazy way, obsessed with this game a bit, right? It was a really important thing for me. And on top of that, I happened to have the things that were not up to me. I was tall enough.
Sure.
On top of that, I was willing to lift. I was willing to work on these other things. I was bright enough to learn system. I had it's gone now, but some sort of bloodlust to go smash people, right? And that diminishes over time when you get older and wiser.
Sure.
But all those things stacked up, and sure, 1 in a million, and I was still going to be just an also-ran in the CFL after how many years? I mean, also-ran. I was on a real team with great players, and I contributed. Yep. I got to win a Grey Cup, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity. But, like, the level of play was still kind of up here, and the level of athleticism, and I was here. It was some of these guys, it was a different world.
Sure.
You know? I'm not trying to say that I sucked, but I could tell, like, there's another level of elite.
Another gear here.
You know?
For some
and this
of
is
these
just the CFL, which
Sure.
I think is a great league, but, you know, where the real freaks, the real mutants, like, they're
Right.
in the league, right?
Yeah.
And they're guys who can run faster than me and outweigh me by 200.
Right.
It's a
freak show.
It's amazing to think the amount of stuff that we've covered in the hour that we've chatted. I believe there's a part 2 to this episode that will be coming up where we actually talk about what it was like to play in the CFL and get some stories on that.
I would love to come back if that's it.
Gabe, that was awesome, brother. And again, you're bringing something different each and every time.
We didn't even have a chance to go to like CFL trivia.
No, and that's what will be part 2.
Part
Grey
2,
Cup
we're going to
trivia,
save for it.
Sacking Ricky Ray comments.
Oh,
all
yeah.
that stuff.
Yeah.
Who did Mike Clemens get drafted by? All those things and more.
Gabe, thank you so much, man. Really
My pleasure, and
it.
I'd love to come back if you ever want to have me. Talk about anything.
You've been listening to the PTBO, Capital PTBO Sports Show, and you've been watching on Your TV, Peterborough, Lindsay. This is an MNC podcast production quality.